Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon for this webinar, Keeping Up with the Reauthorization of the Child Nutrition Act. My name is Rachel Santo, and I'm a Senior Research Program Coordinator here at the Johns Hopkins Center for a Livable Future. In the room with me is Sarah Goldman, a Senior Program Coordinator, and Ann Palmer, who you can't see, who's a Program Director at the Center. We're delighted to have with us this afternoon Chloe Marshall from the National Farm to School Network and Mollie van Lieu from the United Fresh Produce Association. Before we begin the presentation, I want to briefly go over a few features of Zoom, the webinar system and video conferencing system that we're using today. All attendees will remain muted throughout the discussion. If you have a question at any point during the conversation, feel free to type it into the Q&A box. You can access the Q&A box by scrolling your mouse up the top of the screen or sometimes at the bottom, depending on your computer setup. We will reserve some time at the end to address most of the questions asked, but we also can chime in when they're related to a specific point of conversation as we go. We'll try to keep it a pretty interactive discussion, so feel free to ask a question at any time. And if you have any issues with the sound, please send us a message via the chat box, also located on the floating toolbar. And you can also use the chat box to share any comments or resources to the discussion. We'll be recording the discussion today, and we'll share it with everyone that registered in the coming week. As mentioned before, this webinar is being hosted by the Center for a Livable Future, an interdisciplinary center located at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. Our work focuses on the intersection, there's the speakers, we'll go back to them. Our work focuses on the intersection of diet, environment, food production, and public health. The Food Policy Networks Project is one of our projects, with the goal to build the capacity of food system stakeholders to reform local, state, regional, and tribal food systems through effective public policy. We do that through training, sharing best practices, networking with other food policy groups and leaders, and developing and providing food policy resource materials. If you aren't familiar with us, I encourage you to check out our website and sign up for our listserv to learn more about future webinars. Today, we're going to talk about the process for reauthorization of the Child Nutrition Act. Many of the policies and projects that food policy councils work on relate to this important piece of legislation, which authorizes programs including the National School Lunch Program and WIC. We're excited to welcome experts on the process of reauthorization of this act to discuss with us the busy set of events happening over the next few months and how food policy councils can engage in the process. Mollie van Lieu currently serves as the Senior Director of Nutrition Policy for the United Fresh Produce Association. United Fresh represents the full produce supply chain, including growers, shippers, fresh cut processors, wholesale distributors, retailers, and food service. Her work primarily focuses on increasing Americans' consumptions of fruits and vegetables through federal policies and programs. Mollie previously worked on nutrition, health, and education policy issues at the Pew Charitable Trusts, the National PTA, and on Capitol Hill. Her love of agriculture started at a young age when she began showing her dairy cows in 4-H, but her heart now belongs to fruits and vegetables. And Chloe Marshall serves as the policy specialist for the National Farm to School Network and is based in their Washington, D.C. office. She previously served as the Maryland Advocacy and Outreach Coordinator with Capital Area Food Bank in Washington, D.C., where she represented the food bank on policy and budget issues locally on Capitol Hill. She's a member of the Prince George's County Food Equity Council and is a founder of the Food Justice Coalition of 20743, which is a collaboration of residents, community organizations, and grassroots leaders who seek community-led solutions to local food equity issues. Chloe is a graduate of Johnson & Wales University with a degree in culinary nutrition. Thanks both Mollie and Chloe, and also I wanted to highlight that we might have a special guest at the end of the webinar, Jacqueline Schneider, who works for the Senate Ag Committee. But if Jacqueline is able to join us, we will see her during the later part of the webinar. So now I'm going to pass it off to Chloe, who's going to give us a brief overview of the Child Nutrition Act in the reauthorization process before we dive into some questions in the interactive discussion part. So Chloe, I'm going to advance to your slide. And let me know when you need to advance the next one.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Again, my name is Chloe. I'm a policy specialist with the National Farm to School Network, and I really appreciate being on this webinar today with you all. So I'm going to give a very brief overview of the history of the Child Nutrition Reauthorization. From here, going to be referring to it as the CNR. So originally, this program started in 1946 as a school lunch program, and you'll see on the slide, it says for national security. And at the time, it was about ensuring that our kids would be healthy enough to be able to enter the military and do things like that. You can see that the program is incredibly different from when it first began as that program. So now, you've seen over the years that different programs have been added, including the Special Supplemental Nutrition Program for Women, Infants, and Children, also known as WIC. As you see other programs and getting involved, including the Farm to School Grant Program. So I think the next slide has that full list of programs. Yes. So I'm not going to read them all off, but some of the ones you may be most familiar with include Child and Adult Care Food Program, which includes after school meals that schools often serve and other enrichment programs, as well as the Summer Food Service Program, which you'll see a lot of buzz around this year, especially with things like summer EBT and expanding that program. Also, obviously, your National School Lunch and School Breakfast programs, which a lot of folks are working on improving and expanding those as well, and making sure that folks can access. And of course, WIC, which is often, usually servicing mothers, women, infants, and children under 5. So also included there is with the National Farm to School Network, the Farm to School Grant Program that's housed in the United States Department of Agriculture, or USDA as we know it. And all of this really came about, or not all of this, but the Farm to School Grant Program came about in one of the bigger CNR reauthorizations, which happened in 2010. It was known as the Healthy Hunger-Free Kids Act. So they do them under different names sometimes. And what I think a lot of people remember at that time was the debate over whether pizza is a vegetable. So we talked a lot about nutrition standards and getting those implemented through that CNR. We also came out with the Farm to School Grant Program, which is currently in effect and which we're working on expanding. So that's just a very, very brief nitty-gritty history of CNR. So if you have questions about that, please feel free to ask them. Yeah, that's my short history lesson.
Great. Well, I can start with questions. So the first question I've got for both of the panelists is, why should food policy councils pay attention to the Child Nutrition Act? Mollie, do you want to start?
Oh, you're on mute right now. Let me unmute you. Okay, there we
Great,
go.
thank you. Sorry, I thought I saw it muted. Thank you guys, and thank you everybody for joining. So, I think that the most important reason is just because of all of these programs that you see in front of you. It impacts every single community. The breakfast and lunch program, I think, is more obvious to people. WIC is pretty well known, but not everybody knows that it lives within Child Nutrition Reauthorization. But there are other programs like CACFP that I think most parents, because of the area eligibility factor of it, don't even realize that their kids might participate in CACFP. The Child Nutrition Reauthorization really sets the parameters for funding levels, reimbursement levels, applications, how hard it is to apply for a program, to be eligible for a program. So it really does set the policy for the next at least 5 years and how these programs are run in your communities.
And I can add on that to say that these programs, like Mollie said, really do directly affect a lot of our communities, and some maybe not as visibly as others, but as food policy councils, whether you can lobby or not, you can certainly advocate for participation in these programs to show that they work and to talk about them in ways to show that they are important and why they are in our individual communities. And I think locally there's a lot that can be done to improve upon them. So even if you don't get the chance to really advocate in CNR, whatever results from that, you can do the work at the local level to expand that program, such as I know my food policy council in Prince George's County, Maryland, worked on supporting increasing access to the National School Lunch Program by increasing for the state to cover the expenses for reduced price meals so that those kids would be able to eat for free. So things like that can really grow those programs at the local level are really important. So knowing how they work nationally can help you grow them at home.
Thanks, Chloe. And as you were giving the background of the CNR, could you describe a little bit about why it hasn't been reauthorized since 2010? Like, what has caused this delay in reauthorization?
Yeah, so excuse me. So the last, like you said, the last CNR to be reauthorized was in 2010 as the Healthy Hunger for Kids Act. And so it's been almost 10 years since that one. It's supposed to be reauthorized every 5 years, but the way that it's structured is that it can kind of run on autopilot, basically, if it doesn't have another reauthorization, if Congress doesn't decide to pass a new bill. So that's the kind of nice thing about it. Programs don't just fall off the map or come to a close or anything like that. So kind of like the Farm Bill. The Farm Bill does not run on autopilot. That has to be reauthorized, but CNR doesn't, which is nice. The reason that there was an attempt to reauthorize in 2015, 2016, but essentially what happened was that the House and the Senate couldn't reconcile their bills. There were some big differences in how they approached writing those bills, and they couldn't come to a unified agreement. So they decided to set it down and focus on it. And that renewed focus would be this year, when we have a lot of new faces on the congressional floor that can take a look at it and really think about how to implement.
Yeah, and I would just add that the 2010 bill was significant. It updated the nutrition standards for the first time in decades, and there's a lot of other kind of changes and improvements to it. So I think because it was such a massive reauthorization, even though that there was an attempt there wasn't necessarily the advocacy pressure to have a new reauthorization, because a lot of folks felt as if they got a lot of the things that they wanted in 2010. But now with it, coming up on 10 years later, there's renewed interest in getting some improvements and tweaks.
So one question we just had come in, and I think it goes well in this conversation, is what is the advantage of reauthorizing if these programs can continue running on autopilot?
I can go. It's just an opportunity, not just, but it really is a great opportunity to either expand or improve programs that need expansion or change. So I think CNR is great, and I think the programs that we have are great, but there are so many things that could change and improve. So at that same token, though, it is a risk you take as well, depending on who's in office at the time. You could take some losses, but autopilot is nice, but we really want to go for the gusto and ask for those big changes and ask for those things that we see are important. So, because the programs are not.
Great. I was also wondering if you could talk about what elements of the child nutrition reauthorization are of interest to your organizations, and what changes to reauthorization your organization is advocating for.
Sure, I can start. So for us, no surprise, being the fresh produce industry, that we are supportive of maintaining the fruit and vegetable serving requirements. So the nutrition standards that went into effect in 2012 dramatically increased the number of fruits and vegetables and the variety. There's now vegetable subgroups that kids are receiving, so we would like to see those stay in place. The fresh fruit and vegetable program, which you might deal with, it would be great if it was available in all schools, but right now it's available in low-income elementary schools, and the intent with that was to expose children to fresh fruits and vegetables in the classroom as a snack that they might not otherwise have access to at home or at school. So there's always kind of been a push to have that be all forms, which is canned, dried, frozen, pureed. But from our perspective, the point of that program specifically is exposure to a wide variety of fresh fruits and vegetables. So we will continue to ask that be a fresh only program. 95% of USDA commodities are non-fresh. So this really just does provide an additional opportunity. Other things, school kitchen equipment, we know that over 90% of schools need at least one piece of school kitchen equipment. It helps serve more scratch meals or more fresh meals, or just in general, schools struggle. They have to be self-funded, their school nutrition program. So when you go to the school board and you're competing against busing and field trips and textbooks, a lot of times those priorities can kind of updating and modernizing your school kitchen can fall to the bottom of priorities. And then for WIC, expanding to age 6 is something that we support right now. It is until age 5, and that bumping it up to age 6 would get kids into kindergarten at minimum. And then one that has been in the news a lot is, or at least in kind of the policy world, is seat time and the amount of time that kids have to eat their meals, and how that could help improve kind of food waste when kids have a more of a relaxing setting and adequate time to eat. So those are some of the big ones that we'd like to see addressed.
For Farm to School, the big thing that we're focusing on is fairly obvious, the Farm to School Act, which would expand the current USDA Farm to School grant program from 5 to 15 million we're asking for, or expanding it from 5 million to 15 million, we're not offering a range, and then increasing the grant cap so that folks can apply for larger grant amounts, as well as being more inclusive of our early care, after school, and summer sites that will want to participate in the grant program, and to really working on explicitly advancing equity through the bill, so focusing on socially disadvantaged farmers and farmer veterans, as well as really identifying children not just from free and reduced meal price low-income households, but also focusing on children from those, quote, socially disadvantaged backgrounds. So really thinking about what applications we're prioritizing and making sure we're getting in those communities that could most benefit from this program and often don't have access to the resources that it provides. We're also really heavily supporting another bill, which is about geographic preference reform. It's called the Kids Eat Local Act. And if you're not familiar with it, essentially it would give schools another option, a more, we want to say straightforward, almost simplified option for procuring locally produced foods. So making it easier in their bidding process to say outright, I want to purchase, Maine blueberries or apples from within 150 miles, making specifications like that much more simple for schools.
Great, thank you both. You've got me motivated to want to advocate for these specific changes too. What do you think that we should be expecting to see during this reauthorization process this time around?
Yeah, so I don't think that we'll see kind of a huge reauthorization like we saw in 2010. I think that would be impossible. I would expect to see the Senate to move first. That committee resembles is made up of largely the same folks that were there in 2015, 2016. The House obviously flipped when they tried this the last time. Republicans were in the majority, now Democrats are. And if you look at that committee makeup on the Democratic side, almost all of the members of that committee are freshmen. So a lot of those folks, I think, are getting up to speed and kind of determining what their priorities are going to be. So that's taking a little bit more time. They've had one hearing so far, but I still think they're trying to figure that out. And even on the Republican side, there's some freshmen there, but most of the committee members on that side were not around, certainly not for the 2010 reauthorization, but a lot of them weren't around for 2015 as well. So that's just process-wise. I think we'll see the Senate go first, and then the House will probably go after that. In terms of issues, I mean, I think the seat time issue, lunch shaming are two big things that we might see talked about. For nutrition, there's been kind of a growing interest in from some groups of addressing added sugars, particularly in breakfast. A lot of times you can hear complaints about the added sugar level for school breakfast. So I think folks, we might see more conversations about that. And then I'd be remiss not to mention, so the Trump administration had rolled back some of the nutrition standards within the past year around milk, sodium, and whole grain. So that will at least be part of the conversation. There's kind of some active litigation on that, but that certainly will come up during the process.
I would just say Mollie summed that up very well. I don't really have anything to add to that.
Great. So as you're thinking through the reauthorization process and strategy, what are some potential threats that you're watching out for during this process?
I think on the farm to school side, what we're really focusing on, like Mollie mentioned, you probably won't see any big gigantic programs come into play or any major changes. At least what we've heard from the Senate is that they're looking on tweaking and making more smaller waves than overhauls. So I think the threats that we're thinking about and just keeping in mind are kind of from that 2015-16 version of the bill, where there were a lot of cuts to important things like CEP or community eligibility provision. So ultimately, our first goal is to always protect and preserve the gains that we've already made. So for farm to school, what we're trying to do is make sure that we're supporting, but also not losing money in the program and making at least some modest gains. So it's not really big threats, if you will, but just trying to maintain and preserve at this point. So, and just ultimately making sure that kids have access first and foremost, and also focusing on quality and health and outcomes that are coming along with that.
Yep, I agree with what Chloe said. Community eligibility provision, which has been pretty popular in the schools that have implemented it, that allows schools that if they have a certain percentage of kids who qualify for free meals, they can offer free meals to the entire school and just make up the difference in funding with local or state funds or wherever they get the funding from, which in most cases schools are happy to do that because it costs so much to kind of staff time and headache to kind of collect the individual applications. So there was a big push in the House bill last time to roll that back, kind of these silly, if I'm kind of opining on that, but we shouldn't be paying for millionaires' kids to be eating school lunch and things like that. But now with the House having flipped and Democrats in control, I don't think that is as significant as a threat as it was, but it always comes up.
Thanks, both of you. Chloe, you kind of mentioned this, and I think Mollie, you've alluded to it too. Senate seems to be where things are moving right now. What are there specific committees we should be paying attention to in the Senate, and are there any committees that we should be knowledgeable about in the House too, as we're keeping an eye on CNR?
Yeah, CNR is really built out in the Senate Agriculture Committee. That's where that lives. And then on the House side, it's the House Education and Labor Committee. So, just keep an eye on those moving forward. If you have representation in either of those committees, it's a good time to start reaching out and outlining what you support. If you're able to lobby, if you're not able to lobby, you can always educate and talk about, we think feeding kids is important, whatever general language you want to go by, or whatever guidelines you have for that. But Senate Agriculture and House Education and Labor are where you want to focus your efforts at this moment in time.
Great. So as we're
Lists are available on their websites if you just Google.
Great. Yeah. And as we're talking to food policy councils today, what specifically can folks across the country and food policy councils do to support child nutrition reauthorization?
Yeah, so I think that the most important thing, and I know that, this can be, depends on if you're allowed to engage in this, but I think most folks are allowed to host site visits, even if it's just educational. I think to the extent that you can get members of Congress, even if they aren't on those committees, because eventually these bills come to the full floor and there's amendments and things like that, just really getting members of Congress and their staff in to see these programs, because I think when they don't see them in person, when it comes to them, when they're in Washington, D.C., it can sound like these bulky federal programs, but when you see it in your community and you come face to face with the recipients and the people implementing it are part of the community as well, and they might be getting a federal reimbursement or federal funding to do it, but in person it very much feels, and it is a community feeding and nutrition programs, it makes it so much harder for folks not to support that and champion it when they see it with their own eyes.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that's a big thing is engaging your lawmakers, whether it be in actual lobbying or just showing them and educating them on what's happening on the ground. I think as national organizations, a lot of people think that, we're the authority, but really they want to hear from you at home. They want to hear what's actually happening in their district, in their state. So sharing those stories and starting relationships however you can, whether it's just by, if you sign on a letter, if you send an email, make a visit to their district office, or have them come out to a site that you might know of, whether it's a school or a summer program or things like that. So, and you have a really great opportunity for that coming up in August during August recess, where lawmakers are not on vacation, but they're outside of DC. And should be back home. So you have opportunities to hopefully get them out to see what's happening at home. So I would take advantage of that if you have time to do so.
Yeah. And I know that can be tricky and scheduling can be hard, or, there might be folks uneasy to do that. But even just if you can't do a site visit, just doing some kind of PR around the programs, even if it's just inviting like the local news or their local newspaper to highlight a summer feeding program, or any kind of federal program, and just kind of talk about the numbers and what the community impact might be and how many people you're serving. Those are the kind of things that congressional staff, if they're good, they should be scanning those local news stories, and that can help them it can help paint the picture for them and for them to understand the impact of these programs, even if you aren't able to host them.
Those are some really great ideas. Thanks for the really specific tangible tasks that food policy councils could take. And I'd also suggest that we have a guide on our website, and I can send this out in the follow-up email, about advocacy and lobbying for food policy councils, and it helps delineate what food policy councils can and might not be able to do depending on your status and organization type. But that can also be a helpful resource to give you the kinds of ideas that you could do around advocacy that might not be necessarily lobbying and could kind of coincide with some of Mollie and Chloe's ideas, because I think those are some really great tangible tasks people could do next month. Another question we had for you is, are there specific advocacy coalitions that are already working on CNA reauthorization that you suggest that food policy councils could look to or join if they're interested?
Yeah, I would recommend the National Alliance for Nutrition and Activity. So that is a network of Washington-based, DC-based, as well as state and local organizations. And it's pretty broad. It doesn't just deal with child nutrition. It deals with kind of all nutrition, and it's a little lighter on the activity part of that. But there's subcommittees and there's child nutrition subcommittees, and it gets a little wonky, but there's going to be no you will never be able to say, oh, I didn't know that policy was coming, because it's a lot of information.
Yeah, that's a really good one too. I would say we're part of a lot of different things. I think I always call it NANA Coalition. I just never remember what it's for, but that's a really good one. If you're always interested, you can sign up for updates from the National Farm to School Network as well. We have a little bit more narrow policy focus, obviously, but we try to keep members abreast of other things that are happening related to CNR and related to moving farm to school forward, even if not a direct farm to school bill. But I also recommend the Food Research and Action Center. FRAC, as you probably know, is actually really, really great about anti-hunger programs within CNR, which is a lot of them. So they have a lot of great fact sheets and things like that too, if you're looking for additional resources there.
Great. So now we're going to turn over to our Q&A box. So if you are on the webinar right now and have some questions, feel free to ask those through the chat box as well. So the first question we have is, what is the relationship between CNR and the ways that school lunch and breakfast reimbursement rates are determined?
That's a great question. So the rates are determined, those are kind of set. There's some increases based on food cost. So the last reauthorization included a 6-cent per meal increase. So it does have to deal with it, but I wouldn't expect to see an increase in reimbursement during this child nutrition reauthorization, except there is a push to have an increase in reimbursement for breakfast. But it's mandatory funding, so then it kind of works on autopilot after that.
In addition to that, you'll see at the local level too that states are making increases on that reimbursement on top of the federal rate. So it definitely is directly tied to CNR, but if you're working at a local level and want to increase that reimbursement rate, we have states, for example, that are providing additional reimbursements for schools that are purchasing locally. So in New York, Michigan, New Mexico, Washington, D.C., they're adding on top of that federal reimbursement. So you can definitely do some work locally to enhance that for schools.
And one thing I would just add on that is that, the reimbursement rate is a full reimbursement rate for kids who qualify for free lunch, reduced lunch. It's a reduced reimbursement rate, of course. But schools actually receive, it's not a ton, but reimbursement for every single school meal served. So they're getting some federal funding regardless of the income levels of the kids.
Thanks, both of you. That was really helpful. Is there any move to make it easier for school districts in the National School Lunch Program to serve after-school supper, kind of like a seamless supper program? Districts are reluctant to become CACFP sponsors due to the extra paperwork and an additional audit. We don't have enough CACFP after-school supper providers in our region.
I can't speak super knowledgeably to this, but I do know it's something that comes up time and time again. So over the past several years, people have been talking about. So there are organizations working on streamlining. I know that came up in 2015 pretty heavily, and obviously it didn't go anywhere because of the whole bill, but there are organizations working on streamlining CACFP and summer food service program to make that simpler. I understand a little bit more from, and I don't know how specific folks are getting into this, but like the at-risk summer food service program and at-risk CACFP. So that's kind of just from being at a food bank, my perspective on it. But yes, folks are working on it. Organization names are not coming to me off the top of my head right this moment perfectly, but yeah.
That's helpful, thank you. The next question we have is about timeline. What's the timeline for moving through the Senate and House for CNR? If you know any.
Did you say what's the timing in the Senate? Sorry, I couldn't hear.
What's the timeline for moving through the Senate and House?
Yeah, so there was a report coming from Chairman Roberts in the Senate, who chairs the Senate Agriculture Committee, that said that they were getting close. I think that maybe they aren't quite as close as he might have suggested, but I think, I don't know, probably before the end of the year, we will see something in the Senate. And then I know in the House committee, they're dealing with the Older Americans Act. So until they kind of get that addressed, even though it's kind of completely unrelated, but they're doing one thing at a time. I think once they get that through, then they will renew their focus on child nutrition. But they have, this Congress runs until the end of next year. So they have until the end of 2020 to pass something before they have to start over again.
Thanks, Molly. As a follow-up to the previous question, when we were talking about streamlining CACFP applications with the National School Lunch Program application, someone wrote in that we need to encourage folks to contact whatever state agencies oversee these programs, because they claim that this needs to be addressed at the state level. So they're encouraging people on the webinar to do that. As of right now, we don't have any other questions, but I'm assuming that there will be more. So if anyone has any questions, please write them in now. So Jacqueline Schneider, I'm not sure if she's in the room yet or if her staffers are still on the call, but Jacqueline, if you are here already, please let us know.
Yeah, she'd be able to tell us what the timeline is.
Yeah, she had another meeting that was coinciding with this webinar, but she might be able to join at some point. In the meantime, we have a few more questions that have trickled in. Someone asked, what are the chances that states will help with the funding if nationally it is cut? I'm not sure exactly what this person is specifically asking regarding program funding.
Yeah, I think I would want to know before answering that what specifically, what program. I mean, if they cut school lunch programs, which is not likely, right? But you know, somebody's got to pay for kids to eat. So I don't know what that would look like, but it depends on the program. If it were something like farm to school program, if that were for some reason cut, I'm not sure what that would look like at the state level. Some states already have grant programs in place that aren't necessarily supportive of the USDA one, but just a supplement and another opportunity to implement farm to school programming in that way. For more like mandatorily funded programs, you won't see cuts to those because it's based on who's participating. So, or not who's participating, but for as many kids are going to participate in school breakfast, that's the reimbursement that's going to be given, depending on if they're free, reduced, or fully paid. So if that doesn't sum it up. Yeah.
And school programs are, even though many, including myself, would say they're not adequately funded for that the reimbursement could be higher, they're typically pretty protected. When you saw the federal government shutdown, funding continued despite the government being shut down. And you know, if they would have gotten to the position where they ran out of money, I'm fairly confident that they would have found money for that, because the optics are not good when all of a sudden kids don't have access to food at school.
That's a really important point. We also have a question. Are you aware of anyone advocating for a preference for organic foods in CNR?
Chloe, you might be better equipped to answer that. I think that there are schools that are serving organic in some manner. It's really tough because of the reimbursement rates to purchase organic. But there are schools that are doing that, but I don't know that you'll see anything at the federal level policy-wise pushing for that. But well, you are probably more attuned to that world than I am.
Yeah, it's honestly the same kind of answer. I don't know that you'll see like a big federal push for that, but I think that's part of farm to school programming is, you know, we talk specifically about local procurement, but within that, we really talk about a lot of, as far as the farm to school network, we talk about the values of procuring locally and not just buying something because it's down the street, but thinking about how it's produced, where and how it impacts the community, how it impacts the kids and things like that. So it's not an explicit focus in CNR, but it's something that we try to advocate for in just farm to school programming in general. So as far as in CNR though, I don't think you'll see that this round. Most folks are really advocating just to be able to even get the fresh fruits and vegetables in the classroom and into procurement. So I don't think we've reached organics just yet.
Thanks, both. We have another question. Can you tell us how nutrition education, like garden-based or culinary nutrition, intersects with CNR? Does CNR fund any school-based programs?
The farm to school grant program we used for nutrition education and the garden-based education directly, actually. So this is why we think it's so important just to increase the funding so that schools can launch programs with that. And it's just a pot of funding that they can use to create these programs and launch them and hopefully create something sustainable.
Yeah, and schools can usually tap into nutrition programs that are locally or through extension that may be funded through SNAP Ed or through Team Up Nutrition Grants. Those are typically, you know, if schools are doing outreach and are embedded within their communities, that's usually accessible to them, those resources.
Yeah, it would be really helpful, I think, too, to give some examples of education-based programs that have been supported through farm-to-school programs, if that's possible, Chloe.
I mean, I think there's a lot actually out there and I do not remember the total number of grants that have been given out. So I hate that I'm blanking on specific programs right now, but a lot of folks have used the grant program to launch gardens, to support current programming. So, God, I'm like thinking of programs that I can't tell you if they're specifically tied to USDA grant programs, but I'm thinking of like, I don't know if it's Nebraska Mondays. It's like a sticker on the back of my laptop. I'm from Michigan, so but 10 cents a meal program there. Folks have used it to launch school gardens. I was in New England a few months ago for a conference, and folks talked about, I can't remember, I think it was in Maine, but they had some school gardening programs where folks were teaching kids about stuff like callaloo, which you find in a lot of like gym cuisine. So growing that and teaching kids preschool programs that are like teaching kids to count through like planting seeds and things like that. Some great programs in Georgia where they're incorporating nutrition education into the actual early care curriculum. And showing kids, you know, where their food comes from, but also incorporating that into some of the core learning values, like, you know, around math and literature and things like that. So somebody taking like high school kids out to the garden, or they had a farm, I can't remember which state it was, but they were taking their kids out regularly to not only labor on the farm, but to learn about, like, to do creative writing out there and incorporate that into the curriculum, or doing like bio and STEM work out there and teaching technology and math and like biology through the actual interaction with the plants and stuff. So I'm sorry that I can't name the like programs specifically because there's so many. But it is, the farm to school is so broad that so many things come into it. But a lot of it is that nutrition education, especially when it comes to gardens and farming.
Thanks, that's helpful just to give folks a sense of the breadth of programs that are supported through CNR.
Yeah, and you can see, you can go to our website, farmtoschool.org, and go to your home state and see what kind of programs they've implemented if you're not sure, and connect with the actual core and supporting partners in each of those states. So those core and supporting partners are the ones who really lead the state level efforts and inform us of what's happening on the ground, so they can give you a really strong idea of what's happening.
Thanks, Chloe. Another question we have, and this person has actually educated us because we didn't realize that summer EBT is something that's being discussed as part of the Senate CNR hearing in April. They were asking if there any chance of moving summer EBT from a demonstration project to a permanent program, and what are some of the other opportunities with summer EBT in SNAP?
Yeah, I think that has received bipartisan support, so that's going to be the easiest way to get into child nutrition reauthorization. Obviously, the cost is always going to be a challenge, but I think that that there's a real opportunity for there to be summer EBT. And just for folks who aren't aware of that program, it's the idea, and it kind of stemmed from, there's existing summer feeding programs where, you know, traditionally a kid has to go to the site or the site has to come to them via buses or something. And this really kind of stemmed out of deeply rural communities where that might not be an option. So the summer EBT is works kind of like SNAP-ish, where families are given for their children a dollar amount to spend at, you know, grocery store or any kind of SNAP authorized retailer to kind of fill in the gap for the summer months.
Great, thanks, Molly. Don't have any other current questions. Let's see, Jacqueline in the room by chance?
I'm sorry, could you say that again? I think I missed what you said.
Yeah, sorry, no, I was asking if Jacqueline, so Jacqueline Schneider from the Senate Ag Committee had possibly been able to join us, and so I was just checking to make sure that she wasn't on. We don't have any other questions right now, so unless others write in, we could end early, but we'll give it like a minute or two more. we really appreciate all of the expertise you brought to us today. This is really not stuff you can find online very easily. It's helpful to have the insider look. All right, well, I guess if we have no more questions, thank you both again so much for being here with us today. And I think everyone learned a lot. We also got some really great ideas for what we can do specifically related to CNR.
Yeah, thank you guys both.
Yep, thank you.
For having us. This has been great.
Yeah, it's been great. Thank you guys.
All right, well, we will post the video of this recording on YouTube and send it out within the week so that any others who want to watch it later or you want to share with other colleagues, you're welcome to do that. So thanks again, everyone.
Have a good one.